We can go ahead and get started. We don't have all the fancy announcement thing up front, but when is, a couple things we want to talk about. When is the state fair?
The state fair is August 9th, and if you would like to work, if you sign up over here, or if you have signed up, let me know and I'll get you a ticket.
If you haven't worked the state fair, it's really a lot of fun.
It's fun.
You don't have to be an expert. You work a half a day and you get to talk to kind of people. It really is fun, and you get a ticket to the fair. So I'd recommend it. If you haven't done it, it's a lot of fun to do. If you want to sell at the fair, you have to work at least one shift. So we haven't met since Sustained Weight Retreat, have we?
Nope.
That Mel was a great speaker. If you were there, it went real well, except for it rained and rained and rained and rained. So we didn't have any in-hive time, but Mel was a good speaker. We enjoyed his talk.
Did you go inside?
No, we actually stayed in the pavilion outside. So we were dry. Lunch was good. The talks were good. Terry put a new box together. Jim checked for nights.
Still didn't find any.
Didn't find any. That's good. But what else coming up? Our August meeting. I don't have any of my notes. My wife's not here. She's playing golf. So that's going to
Our August meeting is to be the in-hive thing, right?
That's fine. I'm looking to the core group. I don't know what our notes were first.
Jen, isn't our August meeting going to be in-hive, out by the hives?
That is what we were talking about.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what we're planning. Of course, if the weather does not cooperate, we'll do something else in here.
So yeah, for your August, then bring a veil. We'll try and start promptly out at the hives and do a little bit of in-hive time. I don't think Kathleen's coming. That's not the day she's coming. So it's just going to be us going to do some hives. Answering a lot of questions. It's a good opportunity.
Six weeks.
Tonight we have a couple different talks. Jeanette's going to talk on what's blooming or what's not blooming. And then we have Girl Scout here to do a presentation. Jim and then Ron Baston. So we got a few things to cover.
RJ here?
Yes, he's on first. No.
Okay.
Hello.
Okay. I have a couple things before we get into this. First, I'd like to say a big thank you to Paul Phillips. Paul works behind the scenes, and he's the one that keeps us connected, and so we can do this. The reason I'm saying that is we do appreciate him greatly, but Jim and I did talks at another bee club a couple nights ago, and theirs didn't work. It's really difficult to figure out plans when you can't see them. So Paul, thank you. Okay. Okay. Before I get into this, I wanted to say, tell you a little story. Today, well, as you know, we're getting into the dirt as far as what our bees can find to eat. My bees have solved the problem. I live about a mile as the bee flies from a Lowe's store. I was in there today, and it was swarming with bees. I strongly suspect they're my bees. So anyway, I was in there. The plant that they like the best, that there were bees all over, is this Gaillardia, and it is, you can't see it, but it's also called blanket flower. And this Arizona apricot is the one that they have. So, you know, the bees were all over it, so they're telling me you need to buy this plant, right? Okay, so I bought one. Yeah, and you know, should take the bees home with me, right? So I bought one, and a couple things about this. You'll notice that when I buy a plant, I buds on it, but not many blooms. If it already has blooms on it, those blooms are only good for the bees for a certain number of days. And if it already has blooms on it, that time might have passed. This way, I know when these things bloom that it will be good for my bees. Okay? There we go. Okay, in my car, it fell out of the pot. Okay. It wasn't as big a mess as it could have been because if you notice, it is very root bound. Okay, so I wanted to show you that, and I have not yet planted it. It was 89 degrees, and I haven't helped out here to do that. But I want to tell you what I do about it. Okay, first thing is, it's root bound up here along the sides, and as you can see, those roots are growing circularly. If you don't do something about it, when you put it in the ground, they'll continue to grow circularly and end up cutting each other off. So what I do is I take my soil knife, you can take up any sort of knife you want, and I cut down like this, 4 places around it. Just cut those roots off. It does not harm the plant, and it will keep it from having these roots continuously going in circles. Okay, down at the bottom, it's just covered with roots. I take those and kind of tease them apart with my fingers. I can't get them completely teased apart, if there's still some in there, I cut them. I cut into the soil ball. Okay, so you're in fact pruning, the root pruning, and it will make your plant grow much, much better. We have seen plants that have died, pull them out of the ground, looks just like that, because the roots have not discovered a place to go. Okay, that's my story for the day. And my bees are happy to close. Okay, so we're looking at what's blooming in July. Okay, first thing is milkweed. There's several varieties of Asclepias. Most people, when they think of milkweed, think of the common milkweed that has kind of pretty blooms on it, but the plant itself is not real attractive. That's not the only milkweed out there. There are several varieties of it. It's a great nectar source, minimal pollen. Oh, I wanted to say, in the email that went out, it said that Jeanette's going to talk about good nectar plants. Well, Jeanette did some research and found out that Jeanette is talking about good nectar plants. There's nothing that I can find that gives actual percentages of sugar. It's just, good, better, best. And typically the ones that I show you are the best. And I tell you whether it's pollen or nectar. So this has some pollen, but is a great nectar source. Monarch butterfly larvae, of course, like milkweed. They like all sorts of milkweed, not just the common milkweed. This is butterfly weed. It's a milkweed. Asclepias tuberosa. I know down in southern Indiana, you see this growing wild beside the roads all over the place. But it's great. Has a bright orange flower, obviously. One thing about all of the milkweeds, they do not like to be moved. So when you plant them, make sure you're putting them where they're going to stay. They send down a taproot about that long. And so if you try to move them, you're going to cut that taproot and you're not going to be happy. Well, anyway. Okay, the hostas are blooming and have bloomed. Hostas, there are, I don't know, thousands, maybe, of varieties of them. This happens to be fire and ice. They have good pollen and great nectar. And their pollen is white. And the bees, I've noticed on mine, the bees love them. This is a BB tree. It is wonderful for for pollen and nectar. I read some literature that says that it might be invasive, but I have then heard that yes, it drops its seeds down around the perimeter of it, but there isn't a problem with them going elsewhere. So I don't know. If you get one, keep your eye on and look at what's going on around you. But this has the highest rating for pollen and nectar. There's a sourwood tree, good pollen, excellent nectar, green white pollen, grows here nicely. And again, it blooms in July or so. So at the time that other things aren't blooming, these guys are coming along. And in August, Anis hyssop. Hyssop is an herb, and this one grows about 8 tall or so. Blooms for 6 to 8 weeks, so it's excellent bloomer. Oh, by the way, that gaillardia that I told you that I just bought, that blooms from early summer until early to mid-fall, so it blooms all year. Okay. Yellowish green pollen, doesn't have much pollen, but great nectar. This is a giant allium. Allium is an onion family. This one grows very tall. There are lots and lots of allia, I guess. Some of them bloom in the spring. Some of them bloom kind of early summer, and some of them bloom late summer. So when you get one, check and see when it's going to bloom. Make sure you have something going on all the time. This one, as you can see, has softball size blossoms, well, not blossoms, blossom balls. And the other varieties are much smaller. They come from the ones that are about that big on up. And the bees do love them. Oh, I thought this was supposed to be up farther. I'm sorry. Swamp milkweed has good pollen, excellent nectar, moderate butterfly, and pollen grains stick together. This is borage. Borage actually is an annual, so you would have to plant this in the spring. It's very hard to find a plant, but if you start seeds, it's easy to start as a seed and then put it out yourself. So you can see excellent pollen and nectar, and again, it blooms all summer, and it's super attractive to bees. They will be buzzing around it all the time. Joe Pyeweed, Eupatorium. You can see that it can be pretty large, but there have been smaller varieties developed so that they're yay high. And they still have good pollen and nectar, even though they've been downsized. It's been a natural selection, and so they still keep the properties that they have, unlike hybridization.
That's one of the things they sell here at Coal Creek.
Oh, is
We
it?
got some last year. It's been awesome.
Do you have the tall kind or
About 3-4 feet.
3-4 feet? Okay.
Mine's like 7 feet tall. 2 years ago.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh yeah, well you can see this is 7-8 feet tall in this picture. Okay, sunflowers, all sorts of sunflowers are coming in bloom. Most of them are annuals. I would say almost all of them are annuals, but they have super excellent pollen. That would be, wonderful, great, highest rating pollen. Excellent nectar source, so that would be one step down for nectar. They're bright yellow pollen. And I made a note that the pollen contains human growth hormone, as does pollen from fruit trees. So it's basically not enough in it to bother anybody, but just made a note that it is there. Basil. Basil again is an annual herb. Let me say that bees love virtually any herb. My marjoram is blooming right now and they're all over it. I haven't let my basil bloom yet. I keep it pinched back because the flavor of it is better if it hasn't bloomed yet. So I keep it pinched back and it gets bushier, and then later on I'll just let it bloom. And it'll have loads of blooms on it that the bees absolutely love. And it'll bloom again for 4 to 6 weeks. So I'll probably start letting it bloom about the 1st of August. But in the meantime, the flavor is, I won't say that it's bad when it's blooming, it's not quite as strong. If your taste buds are that sensitive. Oregano, another herb, low growing. This one is a perennial. And so you plant it once and it keeps coming up and gets larger and larger.
Are all oreganos perennials?
Are all oreganos perennial? I believe most of them are, but there may be some annuals. There's also marjoram, which is a real close first cousin to oregano that is perennial.
Oh, her brother has 2 brands of oregano. Bumblebees love one, and the bees won't touch it.
The honeybees don't touch it?
No, and it goes to the other oregano, goes under that.
Maybe there's different types of oregano.
Yeah.
And what determines what bees like it often is how far their tongues have to go down into it to get to the nectar. So one variety might have taller blooms on it that the bumblebees get to, and the other one has shorter that the honeybees get to. Mine, the honeybees like, but you just live and learn, right? It's like the plant monarda, which is bee balm. I have a big patch of it. I've never seen a honeybee on it, but the bumblebees love it. Okay, this is a Japanese pagoda tree. I have one of these at my house. It hasn't bloomed. It's just a baby. But it is. It was described to me as sort of the late summer black locust. Okay, that's what I was told when I bought it in the end. So it's terrific nectar and pollen source. Blooms in August. Has creamy white pollen. And I understand, and from my reading, I found that the bees absolutely love it. You walk by one and it's just buzzing. So I'll tell you more about that in about 3 or 4 years. Okay, that's it for tonight. Yes?
How long does it take for it to bloom?
For the pagoda tree to bloom? You know, I don't know. I wouldn't expect it to bloom for 3 or 4 years. Mine is just a, you know, just a switch. Okay. So, okay. Now I get to see Jim's presentation with pictures.
Well, before that, Allison Silage. So, Allison Silage is a Girl Scout, and she has been working on her Gold Star project, and she's been working on honeybees, and she's been kind of with us and around us for, how long have you been coming here? Yeah, a few months. And she's here tonight to talk a little bit about the project and to explain to us what she's been doing and what her results have been. So, Allison, you have something. That a little bit.
And so, as Jim said, I am Allison Silage. I'm going to be a sophomore at Carmel High School. I'm on the robotics team there, and I'm also running cross country. And I'm a Girl Scout since kindergarten, and I'm working on my Gold Award.
Allison.
All right.
Project.
Is that not working?
Turn it. Switch it aside.
Alright, so what is a gold word? Let's start out with that, because not a lot of people know about it. It is the Girl Scout equivalent of the Boy Scouts Eagle Scout, except for the gold word is actually harder to earn than the Eagle Scout, but the path to Eagle is harder. So overall, I would say you're even-ish. I don't know. So my project in specific. So my project is called The Unbelievable Power of Bees. And I am trying to educate the public about how important bees are and what they can do to help the declining bee population. So I'm doing this through, I am handing out booklets, which you all should have gotten one, that have fun activities to do that'll teach about bees. And I have 2 more booths at the Cool Creek concerts to hand out these booklets. I did one last Friday, and that went pretty well. I handed out about 40 booklets and talked to lots of people about beekeeping and what they can do. And then I have one this Friday, which I will be, it's going to be hot. And then one on August 2nd. And here's a picture of my booth. So I have an empty hive there that people can go and look through. I have one of my bee suits. I have 2 bee suits. So I have the one that I don't like as much out there. I have some educational posters, and then I have some pictures of bees in my hive that people can look at and do their booklets, become rangers. So, to raise money for my project, I'm doing an Adopt a Bee program. So with this, if you adopt a bee, it is $1 to adopt a bee in my hive, or for $2 you can name a bee, and I would put a little sticker with the bee's name on the side of my hive. So I am taking donations if you'd like to. And then if you want to be connected with my project and see what I'm doing, I have an Instagram and a blog.
How long have you had bees?
This is my first year.
So far,
Starting things out. Yeah.
Did you create,
Yes, I
cover your booklet and everything?
Yep.
This is really nice. I'm an elementary teacher, so this is really good.
Thank you very much for coming here. This is entirely separate, but to help support Allison's project, we're going to pass a Bastion Bee Farm hat. If you want to contribute to her program to help offset the costs of presenting her materials and such, feel free to, don't feel obligated, but feel free to help out there if you're so inclined. We're going to bring up.
That's a hazard.
You just pass it. What the heck? It's kind of your
She doesn't have the next card, so you can write the name of your bee if you want.
Okay, there you go. So see Allison after if you actually want to name your bee. So, Jeanette was talking about, she and I presented at the Central Indiana Beekeepers as well, and we were there on Monday night, and their projector died. Ours is dying, as you can see there's a big yellow spot in the middle, but unlike Holiday Park, who said we probably can't get another projector, they've already told us that they have a new one on the way, so this will get better. So I want to talk tonight, I called this, and this wasn't actually the name of the article in the journal, it didn't actually have a specific name, but it's the worst kept secret in honeybee research. And I wanted to introduce this by telling a story, it's kind of an old joke. Little boy is sitting in Sunday school class, and the teacher comes in and says, "What am I describing? It's small, you can hold it in both hands, it's furry, it has floppy ears, it has big eyes, and it likes to lick your face." And a boy sticks his hand up, and he says, "Well, the answer is Jesus, but it sounds like a puppy." and that's a little bit of what we're going to talk about tonight. It's one of these situations where we think we know what the answer should be, when we really looked into it, we found out that it was something entirely different than what we thought. So, anybody know who this guy is?
Oh, he's that researcher.
Yep, that's Dr. Samuel Ramsey. And he is currently with the USDA Research Lab in Beltsville, Maryland. And he did his research, his PhD research, and is currently working on Varroa diet. Specifically, what do the Varroa eat? If you have not seen anything of him, you should probably take a look at his 3-minute YouTube video on Varroa. If you search for Sammy Ramsey, UMD on YouTube, you will find his videos. It's hugely entertaining and was largely responsible for his dissertation being accepted, actually. But like a lot of things in the beekeeping world in general, there are things that we hear about and there are things that we know. But until they are published in a peer-reviewed journal, we don't accept them as fact. Okay? Now, Sammy Ramsey has been doing this research for a number of years, and he's been out speaking at various conferences, presenting the results of his research. And everybody's been very enthusiastic about that, but everybody's been kind of holding their breath a little bit until his research actually went through peer review process and was published in an international journal, which it was in April. So at this point, we're going to talk about what his research findings were and why they're so revolutionary. It's probably, in my opinion, some of the most significant research findings in beekeeping in the last 15 or 20 years. So we're going to start out talking about gout. Okay? Does anybody here have gout? Do you enjoy it? No. Okay. Are you aware, well, you don't know this, but Sammy's dad had gout. And this was what started his thinking process. And are you aware that if you have gout, there are certain foods you should avoid? Specifically fatty foods, especially things like organ meat, liver, that sort of thing, is really bad for people who have gout. Because when the human body, and any body, digests these types of very fatty things, it leaves a residue in the blood called purines. And for people who have gout, these purines deposit in the joints, oftentimes something like a big toe or another joint, and they deposit as uric acid crystals, which cause irritation and inflammation in the joint and all sorts of problems. So this was a problem that Sammy's dad had dealt with for most of his adult life. So this started as Sammy got into entomology and entomology research. He started dealing with Varroa. And there were some things that everybody understood about the Varroa mite. One of the most important ones was what Varroa ate. Okay? Varroa were essentially vampires. If you understand how the wood tick interacts with mammals like us or dogs, okay, they attach onto us, they eat blood, that's their nutritional source, they use that, they feed that, they're essentially herbivores. Okay? And way back in the 1970s, some of the earliest research that was done on the Varroa mite was done in Russia. And this kind of illustrates another problem with research and time. When there is a scientific issue that is researched in one part of the world, and as that issue spreads across the world, okay, scientists across the world start paying more attention to it. But as they're looking for information of previously published research, oftentimes it is not in a language they understand. So when Varroa moved into Europe, European scientists started looking for previous studies on Varroa, and it was all in either an Asian language, because of their interaction with the Asian honeybee, or in Russian. And so what happened was some of the earliest European researchers who looked at these Russian results came to the conclusion that the Russian study had found that Varroa were feeding on hemolymph in bees. Hemolymph is the bee equivalent of our blood. Okay? And that was essentially what the Russians had found. And the method they used was a radiological tracer. They had fed the bees a radiological tracer that deposited in the hemolymph, and they found that tracer in the Varroa mites. And so that's how they drew that conclusion. But what Sammy and some other researchers came up with was some things that didn't quite match that story. If you've ever seen a comb from a hive that has been wiped out by Varroa, If you hold the comb up and look at it on edge, you will see little white deposits on the edges of the cells. And what those deposits are Varroa poop, feces, essentially. And if you collect that material, which is a great afternoon's entertainment, and you analyze it, you'll find out that it contains a chemical called guanine, okay, which is a type of purine. Okay? And if you look at other insects that are known to feed on hemolymph, other than Varroa, and you look at their feces, it does not contain purines. So this caused people to say, wait a minute, something may not be quite right here. Another issue was, if you look at the nutritional value of hemolymph in insects, it's very different than the nutritional value of blood in mammals. We were drawing this analogy that doesn't really exist. Because there are things that feed on us and feed on our blood, we assumed there were things feeding on bees' blood. As it turns out, hemolymph is not a very good nutritional source. And most insects who actually eat hemolymph as a part of their diet don't rely on it exclusively because it's such a poor nutritional choice. So how are Varroa surviving, supposedly, living on hemolymph? So, then they went back and they looked at the original Russian studies. The studies that, by the way, nobody had really reproduced. Okay? And they found that the technique that the Russians had used, while considered valid at that time, was since found to be very, very inaccurate. Okay? So, now we've got a bunch of things that don't seem to be adding up. Okay? Lastly, they looked at where are Varroa mites found on honeybees. We've all seen the classic picture of Varroa on honeybees. Where does that picture show them being? Yeah, right here, okay? Right on the back. Well, as it turns out, most of them are found actually on the underside of the body. And in those locations, if you just do a quick look, those are not locations that would give a parasite easy access to hemolymph. So again, things aren't quite matching up here. So, last thing they did was they looked at the actual mouth parts of the Varroa. And insects are a lot like birds and other specialized creatures, and us. Their mouth parts are designed for their diet. You know, we are omnivores, so we have crushing teeth and we have tearing teeth. If you look at a grosbeak, a bird, you know, he's got a beak that is designed for cracking nuts. You know, if you look at a wading bird with a long, thin bill, they've got a, you know, they are designed for eating worms or frogs or whatever. So the mouth parts are designed for the diet. If you look at the Varroa's mouth parts, and this is actually an electron microscopy image, you can look in the April 80J, actually, to see all of these images in better detail. They found that if you compare it to other insects, the Varroa mite's mouth parts are not adapted to a liquid hemolymph diet. They're actually adapted to a semi-soft diet, which is not a liquid diet. And then, the very last thing, looking back at a lot of the research that had been done in Varroa control, there have been a number of chemicals developed which theoretically should have been extremely effective in controlling Varroa. But when they were tested, they were proven to be very ineffective and never made it to market. One of the things that these chemicals had in common was the delivery system, which was through the hemolymph of the bee. And they didn't work. So, they designed, excuse me. So this team designed a series of experiments. Excuse me. First of all, they took a group of bees and they injected them with very specific fluorescent stains. And these were stains that would only deposit in certain types of tissue. One type of stain would only deposit in the hemolymph, nowhere else. Another type of stain would only deposit in the fat bodies. And they were hoping to use these stains to determine what the Varroa were actually eating. Next, they actually looked at where the Varroa were feeding on bees. And they took a group of 104 honeybees with Varroa mites. They counted where the mites were on the bees. And then using electron microscopy, they actually looked through the hole pierced in the cuticle to find out exactly what the Varroa were accessing at that piercing point. And then lastly, they took a group of Varroa mites and they fed them a very specific one-source diet. One group got tissues, hemolymph tissues only. The other group got honeybee fat body tissues only. And they compared the results. So what did they find? Well, if you look at their analysis of where varroa mites are found on honeybees, that classic picture that we're all familiar with, that was less than 1%. Okay. This also should add some credibility to the statement that if you're looking at your bees on a frame and you see mites on the back of your bees, that hive's already dead. Okay? Because that one mite you're seeing is 1%. Okay? The far and away, the vast majority of the bees were actually on the lower abdomen, right around here on the second scale. Excuse me. Interestingly, they found that there were more varroa mites on the left side than the right. But far and away, they were looking to get under these first couple of scales in the abdomen. Those are the locations, by the way, where the fat bodies of the bee are located. They are not locations where pools of hemolymph are found. They looked at the piercing areas, and the piercing areas were always, 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 without exception, directly into the fat body. Then they looked at the specific diets, and they looked at how these varroa mites performed when fed hemolymph tissue or when they were fed fat body tissue. And they found a huge difference. Those fed on fat body tissues survived twice as long, they laid 8 times as many eggs as mites that were fed hemolymph tissue. So much higher standard of performance for mites that were feeding on fat bodies. And then lastly, the dye stain test. And this to me was probably the most conclusive. What you're looking at here, these are the names of different stains that they use. And these are the different systems that they actually stain. So if you look at Brightfield stain here, here's the digestive system. It's stained very nicely. Here's the hemolymph, pretty much no reaction. Here's the fat body, lights it up like a Christmas tree. The varroa mites that fed on Brightfield stained bees look like this. Okay, what do they eat? They're eating fat bodies, right. Uranine is a yellow dye. It stains hemolymph. It does not stain fat bodies. And mites that were feeding on uranine stained bees showed no fluorescence. Okay? Same thing, Nile red. Nothing in the hemolymph. It stains fat bodies very nicely. Varroa mites who fed on these bees glowed nice and brightly red, and then they combined them. So the dye stain studies showed pretty conclusively that these mites are feeding almost exclusively on fat bodies. Swallows. Almost exclusively on fat bodies. So, okay, this is interesting. We've changed our attitude about what a parasite eats. Why does that really matter? I mean, what's the significance to us? Why is this the most significant finding in the last 15 or 20 years? Well, one of the most important reasons why is if we are going to develop effective chemotherapies, and by chemotherapy I mean just like what it sounds, it's a chemical treatment that is going to get rid of varroa mites in some way, we have to be able to deliver it effectively. We have been targeting the wrong system, okay? We've been targeting the hemolymph, okay? When in fact we should be targeting the bee fat bodies. Okay, if you know anything about water-soluble and fat-soluble chemicals, okay, they respond very, very differently. So understanding what target systems we should be looking at is a huge thing. So this has caused a major shift in the last few years in some of the most forward-looking varroa control research to focus on fat bodies and delivering either effective miticides or even looking at some much more subtle hormonal treatments that may merely sterilize the mites rather than kill them. So it's much more humane. Those of you who are mite lovers just want to just sterilize them. But it has much lower impact, of course, much lower residue than our honey. So this research is ongoing. Sammy has actually moved on. He's working on some different types of research now. This has moved on into actually treatment development. But this is probably one of the biggest things. We've all been waiting for that silver bullet. And we may never have a silver bullet, but the chances are that in the next few years, we may see the development of some treatments that are going to be not only much more effective, but hopefully much more sustainable over the long term. Good question? Yeah?
Did anyone actually develop for the hemoglobin, some kind of, to target that area
Yeah,
when they didn't understand it was really in the fat.
yeah, there were a number of treatments that were developed that were intended to be delivered through the hemolymph, and they didn't work. And now we think this is why. Not that the treatment, not that the chemical itself wouldn't work, but that the delivery mechanism. It'd be like if I found a magic pill to cure your illness and I kept trying to stick it in your ear. I mean, it's not the chemical's fault, we're just delivering it in the wrong hole. Anyone else? All right, thanks much.
Our main speaker for tonight is Ron Baston from Baston County Farm. Appreciate them being here. They're a good supporter. They bring their trailer over here so we can buy all the doodads and things that we need and things you always need something. I guarantee you right now, I'm not here about half a dozen things. So, Ron's going to talk to us for a little bit and answer a lot of questions. So, Ron?
I guess I'm supposed to talk about the troubles we have being a professional beekeeper. Is that right?
How you started, how you got where you are.
That's a long list.
We run about 650 hives right now. If you ask my wife where we went wrong, I should have been a doctor. Not beekeeping. Because she works the hives with me. So her and I, we run 650 hives. Joe usually takes care of everything in the store. So when you run 650 hives, it doesn't matter what the weather is outside. You're outside working bees. So Saturday and Sunday, when you all are enjoying your air conditioning, we'll be outside working bees. So, we actually have 100 double and triple stack nukes that we're putting into hives this weekend. So it'd be nice to wait till the weather's better, but they got to be put in there. So, what else did we do wrong? This weekend was a real good example. This past weekend, we ran a queen grafting class. And I don't know, we had 15, 20 students there. Taught them how to graft, taught them how to make a starter. We went out into the hives, we shook bees into a starter. We taught them how to graft, put their graft in the starter. Day and a half later, I went to the starter to go put it in the finisher, and lo and behold, we had shook a queen into the starter. So there were no cells in there. There were a whole lot of eggs in there from what the queen had laid, but there was no cells in there for the people that grafted. So Scott came and grafted, and sorry I was making queens out of it. We did find where the queen came from, and that hive happened to be full of queen cells already when I opened it back up. So that's one thing we did wrong. As far as beekeeping, getting into it professionally, I'd move kind of slow. As I said, we're going to do 100 or so nukes this weekend, so that we're going to put into hives. So we've got to have 200 boxes, 25 skids, 100 lids, 100 feeders, all for those hives. So if you're not prepared for that ramp up, I mean, it gets in your pocket and it's hard to do real quick. So when we started out with a couple hives. We got up into the 30s and then decided we were going to go bigger. Going from 30 to about 250 was a pretty big jump. Then going from 250 up to 500, 600 was a real big jump. And then next spring we're probably going to go up to 1,000. So we'll be probably one of the largest in central Indiana.
Where do you keep most of your Where do you keep most of the hives?
Our hives are spread out. We're right now for the 650, we run about 25 out yards. So we run about 24 hives in an out yard. And our out yards, typically we like to keep them 5 to 10 miles apart. Some of them are a little further than that. As a general rule, that's what we want. Because if honeybees foraging, if she's foraging 3 miles, doing a 12-mile radius around that hive, we don't want 2 yards that are foraging in the same place. We want them in different areas. If we get viruses or we have problems, it's contained to that yard and it doesn't affect several yards. So we run, this year we're running hives just outside of Hamilton County over to the state line, over to Ohio, and then we run some north as well.
How do you find yard locations, Ron?
The best way to find yard locations is just to put the word out there that we're looking. This year we got hooked up with one of the DNR officers over in our area who he hunts a lot, and he has permission to hunt on a lot of farm ground, and he got us permission to set hives everywhere he has permission to hunt. So typically what we do is we pay the landowners in honey at the end of the year. Most of them are farmers, and they want them for their soybeans anyway. Even if they didn't get the plant this year, we still want bees around. We're keeping our fingers crossed that there is a soybean crop, so right now that's the only thing that's going to save our honey crop. So, but that's how we find it. We just start asking around. Word of mouth travels. And, you'd be surprised how many people would like to have beehives on their property but don't want anything to do with them. You know, and then we look for locations that are kind of out of the way. We don't like them sitting along the road. Not saying all kids are bad, but a lot of kids like to throw rocks at them, like to shoot them with shotguns, things like that out in the country. And so we try to keep them out of the way where people can't see them. So that's one thing we look for.
Are they mostly out rural type areas then?
Yeah, we try to keep them. We try to keep them out of populated areas. We have some bees that are setting over around Connersville. That was a very secluded area, and our bees did find the only saltwater pool in the area. And they're visiting it quite frequently. So that's another thing that we did wrong this year. We had the opportunity to put some beehives over around Connersville. There's the largest wildflower plot in Indiana is in Connersville. Has to be about 400 acres. It's spread out over about 15, 20 miles. And we were actually able to set about 150 hives over there. As soon as we took them over there, it's been the wettest it has ever been in Connersville, and there has been absolutely zero nectar collected in those hives. In fact, last weekend before we went down to HAS, we fed about 200 gallons of feed in hives this time of year, which isn't fun to do. So,
When you got them spread out that far, how do you service? I mean, you were talking about you and your wife. Obviously, you and your wife don't go every one of these.
There's a couple other guys back here that run a lot of hives. We're just like anybody else. We work 9 days a week. And we try to hit 5 yards a day. And we start, our first beehive is opened about 7 o'clock in the morning. And we're usually done 7 or 8 o'clock at night. So, yeah.
How do you keep track of all the things that you need?
That's why my wife goes. My wife has basically she's got a blueprint of every yard. Like we were talking today, we actually have 100 supers left in the barn that need to get put on somewhere before the wax moths totally destroy them. So she pulled out all our papers and we plotted out where those 100 supers on somewhere and hope for a soybean crop. So she's got everything written down. She knows what every queen is in every hive, where the queen came from, whether it's one that we drafted off of one of our II queens or what it is. She knows the genetics of the queens that's in every hive.
Is it a paper and pen system then, not
Yep.
electronic?
Yeah. Electronic systems get very, very sticky when you're working. So if her paper gets sticky, she can change it, she can fix it, and go on. But then when she gets back, she enters everything in the computer and then prints it all out.
Ron,
You settle on a certain, like a Russian bee or a tank bee or.
Indiana bees.
Yeah.
There's no, we probably have more carnelian in our bees than anything. Our bees are a little darker colored than the typical Italian bees. We do have some Italian queens that we run just because we like them. But most of our queens are raised off of an instrumentally inseminated queen that we graft from, and then she's open mated in our mating yard. So she's mating with black bees or brown bees, Italians, carnelians, whatever's in there. The majority of our bees are Indiana mutts, is what we call them. They don't have a particular set genetic.
Ron, I mean, you guys are quite diversified. I mean, you're doing pollination services, you're selling honey, you're selling bees, you're selling equipment. How do those different revenue sources sort of stack up against each other to make the total business for you guys? What's the most important?
All of it. If you don't have it all, you can't make it. This is what we do. The equipment, we got into that because we were getting bigger, so we decided to start selling bee equipment, and then that just exploded from people asking us for different things, picking up different lines. So that's why that went. You got to have the bees, you got to do the pollinating, and you got to sell the honey. And if we collect 25,000 pounds of honey, and we sell that honey all wholesale, you might make 75,000 off of it. If you collect 25,000 pounds of honey and you retail it, and you happen to get up in the $8 range a pound, you're up to $200,000. So you have to do it all to make it justify what we're trying to do, because they didn't become a doctor.
I know you send your bees to California for pollinating. Do you do pollinating locally too?
We just do a little bit here in Indiana. We do pollinate a couple orchards, but most of ours are just sitting in out yards where they're just hopefully collecting honey for us. And don't do a lot of pollinating around here. Indiana has a lot of vine crops. If you're going to be a professional beekeeper, and I don't know if these guys do it, don't pollinate vine crops, they're going to kill your bees. So stay out of vine crops. Anything that's got to be sprayed, they're going to kill your bees. So let them find the bees from somebody else wants the bees to die. A lot of people want to pollinate pumpkins, because pumpkins are pretty big in Indiana. Bees get nothing from pumpkins. Great big flower. They get some sticky orange pollen from it, but it's not really beneficial to them. So don't get coaxed into thinking that if you go pollinate pumpkins, you're going to get pumpkin honey. It doesn't exist.
What does pollinate?
What does pollinate them? Bees, bumblebees, butterflies.
Bumblebees.
Oh yeah, anything does. The main thing is pumpkin growers and anybody that has vine crops, they know if they don't have bees, their crops aren't going to be very good. It's not quite as dependent on the honeybees as the almonds is, but it's pretty dependent that they get bees in there.
So when you send your stuff to California, do you get paid per hive that you send out there?
Yes.
And then it's for the amount of time, do you get,
No,
how long does it stay out there?
The almonds bloom, the almonds usually start blooming the 1st of February, somewhere right in there, depending on the weather. And they'll, depending on how the weather goes, then they're gonna bloom for 2 or 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks. And then they get pulled out and sent back.
So it's about a month, basically.
Yeah, actually, our bees go out in November. We load them up in November and ship them out to California. And then they're in a holding yard out there, where they're just waiting to go into the almonds. And then the first part of February, they get moved into the almonds, where they pollinate them, and then they get moved out of the almonds back into the holding yard, and then they come back in again.
And it's the full hive, the queen, the worker queen, they're all, everything is sent out there.
Yeah, you've got to have, typically you've got to have what they call seams, which is between your frames, they call those seams. And typically you've got to have somewhere between 6 and 8 seams of bees to get graded to get into the almonds. If you don't have that many, they don't get graded good, and they don't go into the almonds.
Oh.
So then you pay to ship those bees out there. It costs about around $16,000, $17,000 to ship your bees out to California, ship a semi-load out there. So you want all your hives to be good and healthy so that they get in, so that you get paid.
They pay you per hive.
Yeah.
When they're in the holding area, are they being fed then?
No, we actually go out in December and feed them, and then we go back in January prior to them going into the almonds. We go out and feed them, manipulate the hives around, do our best to get all the bees up into the top box so that when they come in and grade them, it looks like it's a full hive. In California, we do a lot of things that as hobbyists you would never do. If we have a hive that is 2 boxes and it's full of bees, and then we've got another one over here that's only a half a box of bees, we're going to take one of those boxes of bees and we're going to stick it on this other hive so that it looks like we have 2 hives that are full of bees. And when they come back, after they've done the pollination, we have to figure out which one's going back to queen. Because we don't look for queens, we just move boxes. So a lot of hives come back queenless.
So if your small hive has a queen and you put another queen on it, you end up with one queen.
Maybe. The hive you took it from doesn't have a queen.
Yeah.
Right.
But aren't they also long enough to raise a queen?
Do I?
Don't they raise a queen then?
No, because there's really, about the time they come back is when they start producing drones. So most of the time they're out there, those hives don't have any drones, so they couldn't raise a queen if they wanted to.
So who's this guy that's checking out the hives, okay or not? Is that an association?
No, that has to be our broker. We go through a broker who arranges where our hives go. So the broker comes in and grades them all, because if he doesn't put good hives in the almonds, he doesn't get paid. So he's got to get paid so he can pay us for the bees. So the broker grades them first, then they go into the almonds. And on a lot of the almond orchards, the owners will then come in and grade them when they're in there, because their owners want to make sure that they've got the number of bees in there that they need to get their almonds pollinated so that they have a good crop. Because there's not enough bees that go to California, even though 75–80% of the bees in the country go to California, there's not enough out there to pollinate the almonds. So a lot of the guys don't get any bees, which affects their almond crop. So they want to make sure they're getting bees.
How can they tell?
They do the same thing, they just open the box.
Well, I mean, how can they tell if it's a job?
If they did a job,
Or later on?
yeah, they get almonds. Yeah.
If you move one box of bees over to another hive, don't they fight with each other?
Not usually.
I thought you always had to do the newspaper thing and get the pheromones.
That would be the correct way to do it, yeah.
made it timely way.
We're out there for 2 weeks in January. We don't have time to do anything like that, so we just move them and you hope for the best.
How often do you requeen, or how do you decide when to requeen?
We only requeen when we have a problem with queen. We don't requeen every year because what we're trying to do in conjunction with the Indiana queen breeders is we're trying to come up with queens that do live and are productive for more than 1 year. So yes, the best thing, I mean, in all essence, the best thing to do is requeen every year. You're going to get a young queen. You're going to get a lot of honey because young queens are going to produce more honey than older queens. But you don't do anything for genetics then. So we don't requeen until we see a problem with a queen, whether it be a virus or she's just not laying good or something's wrong, then we'll requeen. But we don't requeen every year.
Here, when you talked about shipping your bees out, and what did you say, it was like 17, did I get right, 17,000?
About 17,000.
How, is that one semi, multiple semis?
One semi.
You ever thought about just buying your own semi? Get a CDL and drive it out yourself?
Well, one of the guys we go with, he did talk his father-in-law into doing that. But the guys that haul bees, they haul bees for a living. It's not real easy to get bees into California because you have to go through a check station out there. If they find a couple ants on your boxes, you're going to get rejected. They'll send that semi to a wash station where they'll take everything off the truck. They'll take everything off the skids. They wash everything down. They put it back together, and you hope, and then they try it again. The guys that haul bees for a living know how to get through those stations, and that's what they do. It's just money better spent than trying to do it yourself. Yeah, they haul bees all around the country. Yeah, work bees, or do the whole thing. That's myself, my wife, my son, and my son-in-law.
So what do? Do you bring back hive beetles, or what's the problem?
No, there's really no hive beetles in California.
Okay.
Why not?
So most of the time the hives come back clean. They don't have hive beetles. What you do though, you have all the bees in the country are in one spot. So there's a lot of viruses out there. So you can pick up some viruses. That's why we go out and take care of our bees. The fellow I go with has talked here several times. Dave Shinfield, been going out there for years and years and years. He knows all the things to do to keep your bees alive. So our bees are in holding yards away from all the other bees. They're in most of the time they're in locked holding yards where hopefully somebody can't break in there and get them and take and steal them. When we're out there, we treat our bees so that they don't get these viruses, and when they come back, the first thing we do is treat them so that we can get the virus.
When do you treat them like that?
Treat them with terramycin. Yeah.
Have you had anybody steal your bees?
Have what?
Have you had any of your bees hives?
Not out there or around here. I did in Tennessee. We used to run hives down in Tennessee. We didn't have any beehives stolen. We had a lot of our supers stolen. But that's the one problem we really had.
Do you have any rusty patch bees?
Have any what?
Rusty patch bees?
Rusty patch bees? No, what's that?
They're native to Indiana, right?
Bumblebee. The bumblebee?
Is that what it is? Is that really just what it is? Big off. I don't even have a hive yet.
Ron, what are you guys doing, if anything, for swarm control or swarm management in the spring?
We watch them swarm.
Kick the dirt.
This year was a terrible year for us. When our bees came back from California, it was wet, it was muddy. Everything went into our holding yard, and it didn't come out of our holding yard for probably 2 months. So all of our hives sat right there together. We couldn't get them out because any place that we would go to take them, we were going to tear it up. So we couldn't move them in anywhere. We couldn't move them out. We couldn't do anything except feed them and treat them and hope for the best. And we just watched them swarm left and right. That is some of the hives we queened this year. So
when you say you're feeding them sugar water, are they good or something like that?
How does the weather affect Indiana being cold and January, February being California? Not cold, is it?
No, how does it affect the bees?
Yeah.
Well, actually, when January hits out there, the queens actually start laying. So we go out in December and January to feed them. We feed them pollen patties because there's not a lot going on as far as stuff's blooming. So we feed them pollen patties because the queens are ready to start laying. So in January, they're usually brooding up pretty good. And that's why when those hives come back by the end of March, 1st of April, they're just completely busting with bees. They're ready to be split. So this year when our hives came back and they all sat in the holding yards, we did go in and split them because they needed to be split, which would be how we can try to control swarming. But that's all we can do. When our hives come back from California, every hive that's busted, the first thing we do is we throw a 3rd deep box on top of it. And we let the queen go up there and lay in there. That kind of helps keep them from swarming. And we give her a couple weeks to fill that box up, and then we go in and pull that box off and set it on another skid and split those hives. And then once we split them, then we immediately throw supers on them so that they have room to do whatever. This year we didn't do a whole lot, so because there's too many.
So when you go out there, do you talk to other beekeepers?
Yeah, that's
And talk about genetics and all that kind of
Yeah,
stuff?
we talk about genetics. We find out how some of the big beekeepers are keeping their bees alive, and then a lot of that stuff we incorporated into ours. Because that's the name of the game, is keeping the bees alive. If you want to get into it professionally, you've got to be able to keep your bees alive, because you can't be a professional if you're buying bees every year. So you've got to be able to make bees from your bees and keep them on that way.
So what's the big deal on the genetics, like sassafras or whatever, some of those other stuff?
We actually have some sassafras queens, and we have some Hawaiian queens. We actually, when we were out in there in January, we had a shipment of queens come in from Hawaii just because we wanted to try them and see what they were like. So we had some hives that needed requeened. We requeened them, and for the most part, they seem to be okay. They're doing pretty good. They're a black bee too. Actually, the Hawaiian Queen Company, their breeding stock is all Joe Lashaw's, and he's out of Ohio. So, I mean, it's in Ohio. It's a Carnelian. So we'll see how they do. But most guys don't run bees that are a specific genetic that you're buying from somebody. There again, you got to raise your own. If you're raising your own bees, you got to raise your own queens. You can't make it if you're buying queens to stick in your hives. So we put queen cells in our hives.
The different commercial people that you talk to, who's had the largest number of hives that you come across?
We were one of our holding yards 2 years ago. We were next to a holding yard where they had 20,000 beehives.
U.S. company?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. That was a lot of bees. We could just see them off in the distance. I mean, it was very flat where we were at, and they were several miles away, and at first we couldn't figure out what it was. So took a little hike and got a little bit closer and climbed some fences and got over there. And
But where you weren't supposed to.
probably. Yeah, that was 20,000 beehives.
Wow.
So in the United States, is there a specific area that produces the most honey? You know, like I know the big guys up in North Dakota and all that.
That's where it comes from.
That's the big one up
Yeah,
there.
Dakotas.
Those hives produce more pounds per hive or?
I don't know if they produce more pounds per hive. There's just more honey produced in the Dakotas than there are anywhere else. It's mostly alfalfa. That's where they grow all the alfalfa seed. So those bees are all pollinating alfalfa. I have a friend that runs bees out there. He runs them in Florida. He brings them up to Indiana and then he ships them out there. He actually contracts his bees. Instead of pollinating, they're contracted for honey. So he has to have certain size. There again, he just graded on how many bees he's got in there, and they go to the Dakotas where they're just producing honey. He doesn't get any of it. They put their own supers on, and then they pull them off, and then they ship them back to him. But that's where the most of the honey comes from.
Where was the 20,000 hives from?
He was from around the Dakotas.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the bigger guys, they just make a big loop around the country. And those bees, that when they got to California, they were in California for the almond, and then they'd pull up there and they would probably go to Texas. And they pollinate something in Texas, and then they go down to Florida, and they go down to South Florida where they're doing melons, and they move up into northern Florida, and they move up into Georgia, and then up into Michigan where they're doing apples, and then they just head on back out to the Dakotas and Nebraska and those places, and they make a circle all year long. That's all they do. Yeah. Most of those guys that we talked to out there, of course, that's all they do is run the circuit with their bees. They're never home.
We have a wash.
Do up.
They could have a wash when I'm on the line.
Yeah, they could be.
Depending on how much they annoy their wife, it might be good if they're on their own.
Do you ever use drone frames in with some of your bees to increase your own productivity from your bee genetics, so to speak?
If our drones are running a little low at certain times of year in our breeding yard, we might put some drone frames in. But we don't run them very often because you're just gonna produce varroa mites if you run them. So
You don't ever use that as a control for the varroa mites?
no. That's a bad control for varroa mites. So if you miss it by one day, you just fill your whole hive with varroa mites. So if all those drones would have to start merging a day earlier than what you thought they were going to, they're bringing out a lot of varroa mites and filling up that hive with varroa mites.
Well, it's not like you'd be busy with 649 other hives.
Sometimes things happen where you don't get back to the yard when you're supposed to, and that could be one of those instances. And that's the only yard where we run more than 24 hives as our breeding yard. That yard probably has about 50 hives in it, which is probably 25 too many, but we get good mating with our queens. So that's why we run that many hives there.
Do you ever use oxalic acid?
There again, it's when you use oxalic acid, you need to use it every 4 or 5 days for 4 or 5 weeks in a row, and it's very hard to get around to all the hives to be able to do that, to keep going back to them and doing that. So we used to use it when we didn't have as many hives, but now with what we have, we just don't have the time to use it, to be able to use it right.
So you just use the strips then, or you?
Yeah, we do the Apivar, and we're also using, we don't use, I brought a bucket of acid. We don't do the formic pro, but we do use what's in there. And we're doing some mite treatments with formic acid crystals, where we're dissolving them and putting them on the blue shock towels and using the blue shock towel. That's more of a flash treatment.
Have you had good results with that?
Yeah, and it's perfectly legal to use when you got supers on. Formic acid you can use. So we're doing a flash treatment with the formic acid, and it's
What do you
doing
mean
pretty
with
good.
flash?
When you use a blue shock towel that's coated in this and you throw it in there, it only lasts about 3 days, and that's why we call it flash treatment.
The bees get rid of it.
The chemical actually evaporates, it's on there and goes away. Yeah. Yeah.
And then do the bees take care of the towel?
The towel, some bees will have that towel out of there in a few days. Some of them will propolis it in before you get back there to pull it. And then you just pull it out. You know, if you're going to do another treatment, you pull out the old towel and put the next towel in.
So you just lay the blue, just right on top of the frames, is that what you, so you
Yeah.
put it in there and you buy it, or you soak it into something?
We buy the formic crystals,
So-
and then we dissolve it and soak it into the towel. Yeah, put the towel in. And you're only putting in a little piece of towel.
Oh, okay.
When you do
How
it.
big a towel are you putting in?
We do the blue shop towels, we cut them into 4 pieces
Okay.
when we're doing that.
Are you selling the formic crystals?
No.
Why,
Amazon.
why are you using that rather than the strips, the formic crutch?
It's cheaper.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah.
So you're using that when honey supers are on, and then at some point later on you're using Amatraz.
Yeah.
How much crystals are you putting on this?
It's by weight, and it's 1 part of the formic crystals, the 2 parts canola oil. And we dissolve it.
What's it with?
Canola oil.
Canola oil.
Yeah, it's just a carrier oil for them. The formic acid will shut a queen down occasionally, which gives the brood a break in the brood cycle. It doesn't shut her down for very long, but sometimes it's enough to break the brood cycle, where she'll quit laying and then start in laying again, and it helps control her over that way.
And how often do you treat, or when do you treat?
Now we're only treating when we have the supers on, or we'll treat right after we pull the supers, and then in the fall we'll go back to the alcohol. And then we always treat with alcohol around January. So we put 1 strip in, and just Dave Shenfield will tell you, so that you don't have to buy a whole bunch. You only got to buy 1. It might give us a whole bunch of money.
Ron, how many hives do you have to have before you actually start making money? Because I keep adding hives, and you're obviously making your fortune, so at what point did this actually become profitable for you?
Helps that situation, now I don't know that it will.
He'll let you know when he gets there.
Yeah. We're not there yet. We would like to be able to introduce some of those to California. And maybe that'll get us a little better then, I don't know.
So at 650, you're losing less money than you were at 500?
Probably not. Probably not. You'd have to ask my wife. No. Yeah. She always wonders why we get this. But,
Well, along that line, so when you were here before, you said that you had thought about doing grapes, is that right? Did you ever do any, and why didn't you do grapes?
We did, we planted a whole bunch of them, and they're still out there in the field. But we just never, I did that about the same time I got into beekeeping, and beekeeping just kept tugging at me, and, you know, the grapes are just growing, and,
You harvest them?
no, birds do.
Yeah.
That's just one of them things, you know.
So why didn't the grapes pan out?
It's a lot of work. about 4 years ago, I actually found a place up in Wisconsin that sold milkweed seed. And I bought some milkweed seed. And most farmers don't want you to do anything with milkweed seed because it is kind of invasive. We planted a little patch of milkweed that never came up where we planted it. But we have 12 acres of the most beautiful milkweed we've ever seen. Because those bees, some of it did come up, and just from them pollinating it, the farmer beside me, he's got to hate me because we've got milkweed, and we've got Canadian thistle, we've got 12 acres of everything a farmer doesn't want.
Cool Creek is actually occasionally giving away packets of milkweed seed. Yeah, for the monarch butterflies program.
And we just started seeing monarchs about 2 weeks ago on our push. So yeah, they did it too.
I think we got time for about one more question.
I was just gonna say, my husband is a farmer that you were talking about, but I've convinced him that it's okay to leave the milkweed in certain places. And now he's even, thistles, I don't think I'm ever gonna get him.
I don't think so.
Just one thing I wanted to say. If you plan on using Apivar in your hives this fall, Ron has it available now out in the trailer. And so, if you order it somewhere, you got to pay shipping. So, suggest that you might want to talk to him about it.
Well, thank you, Ron.